Good morning. How are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm joined by Chris Warren, and we are going to go through a fun hand played at 1-3, and let's rock and roll through it. So in this hand, there is a raise from under the gun, folds around, here decides to call from the cutoff with 7-5 suited, again playing 1-3 live. Chris, what are your first thoughts on the preflop call?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a loose call. We have to be taking advantage of our opponents here, but we do have the position to do so. So, if you're confident, you can try this.
Yeah, I prefer this a little bit more from the button than necessarily the cutoff. Just one extra person that could take position on you, whether they squeeze or whether they call. Just something to consider. With information, this could be fine, but yeah, I think you really want to know that this is really solid before you just start throwing in every single suited gapper as your typical preflop calling range, especially from cutoff, hijack, etc.
Yeah, I think the thing we have to remember here is that pre-flop calling from a fundamental basis is about odds. And, when someone opens 6x the blinds, like you're just not getting odds. So it just has to be, we're playing this hand because we have an advantage in terms of folds post flop. So that would be the reason why we would do this.
Yep, agreed with that. So we end up getting a squeeze from the small blind, although a very small one, up to only 30 total. Big blind folds, early position calls, and hero calls as well. I mean, based upon the size of the squeeze, and we are getting roughly 4-1 and closing position, and I wanted to play 7-5 suited pre-flop anyway, I'm just gonna call here and close out. I don't really see any reason to come back over the top. I don't see any reason to fold given the price. Would you do anything different here or same thing?
Yeah, it's such a weak part of our range, but like you said, like if we're very reliant on our read of like, oh, we can play this hand profitably, then I guess we're probably playing it for this high odds squeeze as well.
Yeah, I think though, if memory serves, I have to go back and check the notes. I think he said that this person is actually very loose. Yeah, the small blind's a very loose reg that typically calls and raises with almost anything, which actually makes this something that I don't really want to call preflop as much, even in the first place, just for that original 12, because you're expecting this kind of thing. I mean, it's nice that it's sized fairly poorly, but it's not great because now you're in this massively bloated pot. Sure, you have position, but bloated pot, no initiative, and you got to hit something to do something or have some, again, like folding information, like you mentioned earlier. I'm just not massively on board with this.
Yeah, and I think this is actually a very common mistake is that people think because oh well I know my opponents aren't playing well, they're doing things wrong, that means I can play a lot of hands, and that's actually not true. If our opponents are playing aggressive, uh, that is the wrong time to add more hands because our hands are going to be facing more pressure, and we want to have that strength in our calling and raising ranges. So. Yeah, this is a very weak hand. Even something like 10-8 suited, 9-7 suited, to get all the way down to playing 7-5 suited, we have to remember that this means we're probably playing even like a lot of other hands as well. We're playing every suited connector. We're playing king 8, king 9 suited. We're playing, just to get to this level, this strength of hand, it means we feel like we should be playing a ton of hands here, which is almost certainly incorrect. See our episode on red chip where you're almost certainly playing too many hands pre-flop, and I think this is a likely candidate for that, but we'll go with it from this point forward.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so here decides to call. End up going to king 8-6, so we end up flopping an open ender. Small blind fires for 60, and early position calls, and here decides to call as well. I mean, in this situation, I don't really love raising. I'm definitely not going to fold because good luck getting me to fold a draw on the flop. Just doesn't really happen. I'm kind of in the situation where I think my only option left is to call. Would you think about raising in this situation, or is this a pretty default call for you as well?
Yeah, I mean this is a big bet from the small blind after three betting small. They're demonstrating a lot of reasonable amount of strength. Okay, they're a crazy player, whatever. But now we have the early position raiser who probably had strength when they originally raised. They're also calling this 2/3 sized flop bet. It, you know, can we like bluff shove here? Or bluff raise. I mean, we're really committing at that point. So,
Yeah.
um, maybe a small frequency, it's okay. I'd certainly like to have, you know, more in the heart plus, straight draw range. We do have the backdoor flush draw. Yeah, I think we're pretty much locked into a call here. It's a little unfortunate. Maybe we could make a case that 7-5 is one of the better hands to shove with, um, because it's the bottom end of the straight. So we have some problems with our reverse implied odds if we hit the bottom end of the straight. But yeah, I mean, just in general, like I think call is going to be your default here. You don't want to be taking a crazy risk. We probably can't fold at this point, although it's I'm feeling like I got roped into this hand at this point. Yeah, I think we
Yep.
just
Yep, 100% agreed. And this is sometimes what happens when you start calling all your suited connectors and all your suited gappers pre-flop is you start finding yourself with these very expensive pots where it's like, I have to continue with this draw, but you start feeling a little silly. So if you start feeling that a lot, session after session, it might be indicative that your pre-flop calling range is a little wider than it should be. Not saying that's necessarily the case always, but I'd keep an eye on that. But I would definitely call here as well and go to the turn, end up hitting that straight, but it improves the heart draw. Small blind continues firing, this time for 100 into 273, and early position calls as well. So here decides to call and close out action, and I'm not massively in love with the call in this spot. I think my default play would just be to shove it right this moment and kind of be fairly comfortable with it. Am I going to get called by hearts? Yeah, for sure. But I think we're getting called by plenty of other second best hands. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on this spot? Would you do the same thing or are you calling here?
yeah, I think we got to shove. It's again, one of the unfortunate parts about calling on this flop is like, oh, well, we're getting 3-1, whatever. Feels like we should be calling, but our odds are not quite as good as they look, right? Because some of those outs are they aren't super clean, and
Yeah.
there's certainly potential for redraws and things like that. So, but all that said, now we're dealing with a sort of very small bet relative to the size of the pot. Um, yes, early position is continuing, but I think a lot of stronger hands at this point would have been incentivized to bet bigger or raise an early position spot. So I'm feeling reasonably comfortable with my hand at this point, and I'd actually be pretty happy if any heart were to fold at this point. So the idea that we're like slow playing this point, I don't think is valid, and I think because we're committed to this hand, we don't want to have a heart roll off and have to make really tough decisions, getting crazy odds and things like that. Um, I just think it's a lot simpler. I think we get value shoving here, right? I think we're going to
Yep.
be ahead most of the time. Um, there's going to be, they're going to have good equity when they do call us. I think a lot, but you know, we put ourselves in this weird situation. We have enough of an advantage. We need to get it in this point. And if our opponents actually make folds at this point, trying to figure out the exact odds that they're getting, but they're getting exceptionally good odds with any heart, things like that. So if we have the potential to get fold, it's actually pretty fantastic. So it's
Yep.
good value for us, potentially create some mistakes. I'm just shoving it in nice and simple.
Yep. 100% agreed. And, some people look at this and say, well, what if they have hearts, right? What if we're just value shoving into them and just giving them pure money? I get that. But again, like early position, how many hearts are they really going to have? Like ace, king of hearts, ace, queen of hearts, maybe ace, jack of hearts. Like you're not talking about like tons and tons of heart combos from them. And small blinds looks to be a lunatic, which means sure they could have lots of different kinds of hearts, but again, like I can't see playing overly nitty against them when they could just as easily have King X or King X plus a heart and feel just as comfortable putting the rest of it in, and then we just have to fade the river. I just don't see any reason to like panic about the flush draw filling. I think that's something that a lot of smaller players that are playing like 1-2, 1-3, sometimes 2-5, and smaller online games tend to like really panic when those flush draws fill up, and sometimes there's the spot to do that, but oftentimes it's like, oh, there's not a ton of combos that you have to really super panic about. So I'm not in panic mode in this spot, and I'm just very comfortably shoving it in. And yeah, I just expecting this to be a very profitable spot in the long run.
Yeah, and it's very important to remember, and I notice so often live players are just always terrified of the flush. Of, oh, the flush came in. Here we are. There aren't that many flush combos here. Even if we're giving credit for queen jack suited, king queen, add a bunch of combos, we're probably getting up to like 8 to 10 combos And I think a lot of those combos would be highly incentivized to raise themselves. So maybe we can even start discounting from there. And then, is this player actually open raising, those hands from the early position? I think we can discount a lot of those flush combos. And we're starting with like 8 to 10 combos probably at the peak, anyways.
Yep.
So with all that in mind, it's just like, yeah, this is a pretty great spot. You don't actually have to be that afraid of the flush here. We're not worried about small blind. We assume they can have tons of things. So, is what it is.
Exactly right. So we end up calling on the turn. So just kind of run it out as played at this point. Jack of spades on the river. Check, check, and hero checks behind. So this is kind of one of those weird ones because it's like, well, we really wouldn't put ourselves in this spot very often based upon the line suggestions that we've made so far. So we're just kind of run this through as played, understanding that we don't really suggest getting here. I'm never, ever, ever checking this river behind. Like I'm really like trying to be respectful to Ed for sure, because like I get it. We all have brain blunders sometimes, and you could look through hands that I've played and be like, that was dumb. So like it's nothing personal whatsoever. It's just a spot where it's like, what are we checking for? Like, what are we nervous about being behind of? Because if early position had hearts, right? Small blind fired the flop, fired the turn, and then checks river, like early position is feeling super comfortable with all hearts, assuming of course that they're not nutted, and then they're very, very comfortable as is. Like they'd fire hearts. There's no reason for early position to think that you're going to fire it for them. So like early position does that. I think the small blind, if they had hearts, they probably fire the river. So not concerned about anyone having like big hands. I'm not really concerned about queen 10. I mean, if someone has queen 10, I mean, good on them. And it's just one of those where I'm like, I'm super comfy just firing here. And because we only have roughly a half potter left anyway, I'm firing the whole thing in and very, very happy when early position probably calls me with like King X. Right? They're probably going to cry call with Ace King some chunk of the time. Small blind could easily make the same kind of play. I could see people checking here with like two pair, and then they just feel like they have to check call. So I can never find a check in this exact spot as played. There's just never a check for me here. It's always a bet, and the only reasonable bet left is just shove it all in.
Yeah, and it's an interesting spot. We're to get to this spot. We kind of made some exploitative minded decisions that maybe we're not coming ahead on. And but when we're playing in a live game, we really have to be aware of those dynamics and what are people's tendencies. And live players aren't going to have balanced ranges in these spots. And so when we get a river check, um I guess even from a balance perspective, it's a pretty appealing situation to bet. But we just have to really realize that, like, okay, our opponents are probably not showing up with a lot of strength here. They are going to feel obligated to make a lot of looser calls in such a large pot, and we're pretty close to like, it's going to be very hard for someone. I could see small blind checking, right? They're crazy; they can probably do anything, but we're definitely getting enough value, and I think it's important to make sure, especially if we're playing wider ranges of hands, that we identify these spots to make good value bets.
Yep, 100% agreed. So here ends up checking, ends up shipping the pot, and early position end up having kings and kings with the heart, which is absolutely fascinating. Definitely something that I would note, that there was no 4-bet preflop with pocket kings in that situation. But other than that, again, like that's just another example of a combo that would have gladly given you $195 of value on the river. So definitely make sure that when you're playing against weaker opponents, that you're looking for every last drip of value that's out there. And there's tons of them. Don't get overly fearful when those flush draws improve. Instead, really think logically and objectively about your opponent's ranges and really get after that value when you can. Chris, any last minute thoughts on this one?
I'm just devastated that this wasn't an online hand and I get to see what small blind has, but I guess we'll just have to move on with our lives.
Totally fair. So thank you so much for hanging out today. If you have your own hand or question you want to share with us, you can do so today at redchippoker.com/discord. Join for free, and we'll look forward to talking poker with you over there. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to let us know. Otherwise, as always, a like and sub would be massively appreciated, and we'll see you back shortly with a brand new video. In the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.